My name is Clara Morgan, and at 68, I thought I had learned how to keep my peace. This morning, the kitchen smells like fresh coffee and the jasmine blooming along my back fence. The sunlight slips across the tile floor, warming the spots my bare feet land. I should be thinking about nothing more than which tomatoes to water first. But peace has a way of cracking open when you least expect it. It's been 5 years, and yet I can still hear my son's laugh. It was Christmas Eve. I had spent 2 days baking an apple pie from scratch-slicing cranberries into the batter for a sweet bread I hadn't made since his childhood. I drove across town with the back seat full of warm dishes wrapped in tea towels so the steam wouldn't escape. When I stepped into his kitchen, the granite counters gleamed under bright pendant lights. Lucas stood at the island, one elbow propped up, scrolling his phone. Aubrey, my daughter-in-law, sipped something green from a glass jar. I set the pie down, my hands still tingling from the heat, and smiled. "These are homemade," I said, hoping he'd remember. He looked up once, took a bite, then chuckled. "Mom, this tastes like budget food." Aubrey's smile didn't reach her eyes. "We're eating clean this week." I laughed with them like it didn't slice me open, like it didn't remind me of every long day scrubbing floors so my son could have new sneakers, of every meal I skipped so there was enough for him. That night, in my one-bedroom apartment with peeling paint and a heater that wheezed like it was dying, I stared at my reflection in the window and whispered back to myself, "Get real." I didn't know it then, but that was the seed. And seeds, when you give them enough time, grow into something people never see coming. The first real change started with a phone call I almost didn't answer. It was early February, rain streaking down my apartment window in long silver threads. I was sitting at the small table I used as both a desk and a dining space, sorting grocery coupons. My old flip phone buzzed across the tabletop, and for a moment I thought about letting it go to voicemail. The number was from an agency I hadn't worked with in months. "Mrs. Morgan," a young woman's voice asked. "We have a long-term client in need of live-in support, light cooking, cleaning companionship. Are you interested?" I didn't know it then, but saying yes would change everything. 2 days later, I was standing on the wide porch of a weathered Victorian on the edge of town. The door swung open to reveal Professor Henry Whitaker, a tall, frail man in a cardigan the color of oatmeal, his gray hair swept back neatly. His eyes, sharp and curious, studied me for a beat before he smiled. "Clara," he said, as though testing the sound of my name. "Let's have tea before we talk about work. It's too cold for chores today." That simple kindness, being invited in as a guest rather than directed like hired help, caught me off guard. Over the weeks that followed, I cooked breakfast. He actually ate folded laundry without having it immediately reshuffled, and read aloud from the thick history books lining his study shelves. Sometimes he'd drift to sleep mid-sentence, and I'd keep reading, letting my voice fill the quiet rooms. Henry paid me more than I'd earned anywhere else, but it was the respect that stuck. I began saving with an urgency I hadn't felt in years. Every tip went into an old coffee tin hidden behind cleaning supplies. Weekends, I baked pies and bread to sell at the Saturday farmers market, wearing the same 2 pairs of shoes until the soles thinned to nothing. Each dollar I folded into that tin felt like a brick in something solid, something I could stand on. 4 years slipped by like pages turning in a book I didn't want to put down. Henry's health grew more fragile, but his mind stayed sharp. He'd quiz me on Civil War dates while I chopped vegetables, or ask me to proofread the chapters of a memoir he swore he'd never publish. On warm afternoons, we'd sit on the porch with mugs of sweet tea, watching the neighborhood kids ride their bikes in loops. One January morning, I let myself in and found the house quiet in a way I'd never heard before. His cardigan was draped over the arm of his favorite chair, his reading glasses folded neatly on the table beside it. He was gone, peaceful in his sleep. The funeral was small, just a few colleagues and neighbors. A week later, an envelope arrived from his attorney. Inside was a handwritten note from Henry thanking me for restoring a little dignity to these final years, and a modest check. Not a fortune, but enough to push my savings over the edge. 2 months later, I stood on a cracked driveway outside a little brick villa in the outskirts of Savannah. The real estate agent, a young man with a voice too loud for the quiet street, handed me the keys. The front door stuck a little, but when it gave way, sunlight spilled across hardwood floors that had seen better days. The kitchen counters were chipped, the stove older than I was. But the backyard was a patch of wild potential with a leaning fence and soil that smelled like rain. I pressed the keys into my palm until the teeth left marks. No one. I whispered to the empty rooms, "No one can take this from me." That afternoon, I planted the first row of tomatoes. My knees ached, dirt lined my fingernails, but every time I straightened my back, the house stood there waiting like it knew we belonged to each other. It was a Friday afternoon in early spring, the kind of day when the air feels soft and the sunlight lingers like it has nowhere else to be. I was kneeling in the backyard clipping back the overgrown mint when I heard the sound of tires crunching over gravel. I looked up to see a shiny black SUV parked half across my driveway. The engine ticked as it cooled the kind of expensive hum you hear in car commercials. Lucas climbed out, first sunglasses perched on his head, a smile that used to mean, "Mom, I need candy," now stretched into something unreadable. Aubrey stepped out on the passenger side, white slacks and nude heels, completely unsuited for the uneven path to my porch. Mom Lucas said walking toward me like this was a casual drop-in. We were just in the neighborhood. I wiped my hands on my jeans, feeling the grit catch in the fabric. "Didn't know you were coming," I said, though my voice came out softer than I meant. "Surprises are fun, right?" Aubrey's laugh was light, but her eyes were already scanning the house behind me. They didn't wait for me to invite them in. Lucas brushed past, heading straight for the kitchen, pulling open the refrigerator door so the cold air spilled out. "Still buying this off-brand yogurt?" he asked, holding up a container. Aubrey trailed her fingers along the counters. "This place has potential. You could do so much with it." She drifted down the hallway, peeking into the guest room and my reading nook. I followed just in time to hear her murmur, "She could stay here like a live-in helper." Lucas chuckled. "Yeah, easier than moving her somewhere far." The words settled over me like dust, slow, suffocating. Back in the kitchen, Lucas pulled a folder from his bag. Inside were glossy brochures of retirement communities, all smiling faces and pastel walls. This one's top-rated. Safe medical staff meal plans. You'd love it. I stood at the sink, letting the water run over my hands. Let them talk. Let them plan. I wasn't done listening. Not yet. 3 days passed without a word from Lucas or Aubrey. The house felt heavier in the silence, though I couldn't tell if it was relief or anticipation pressing on my chest. Every so often I caught myself glancing out the window, half expecting that black SUV to appear again. That Thursday afternoon, a car I didn't recognize pulled into the driveway. It was a silver sedan, polished but not flashy. A tall man in his early 40s stepped out, dressed in a navy suit without a tie. He carried himself like someone who'd spent time in courtrooms but didn't need to announce it. "Mrs. Morgan," he asked as I opened the door. "Yes, I'm David Whitaker. My father was Henry Whitaker. You cared for him the last 4 years of his life." The name pulled me back instantly. Henry's kind eyes, the porch afternoons, the quiet gratitude in his voice. "You're the son who visited every Sunday," I said. David smiled faintly. "And you were the one who kept him going far longer than the doctors expected." I let him inside, and he sat at my kitchen table as though he'd been there a dozen times. His voice lowered. "I was contacted yesterday by a man named Lucas Morgan. He was asking about the process for obtaining legal guardianship over a parent. The air seemed to tighten around me. He claimed you were showing signs of confusion, that it wasn't safe for you to live alone," David continued. "He asked how to assume control of your finances, property, and medical decisions." For a moment, I just stared at my hands, resting on the table. These were the same hands that had signed every school permission slip, patched every scraped knee, and carried bags of groceries up 3 flights of stairs when my legs ached. "I want to fight," I said finally. David nodded as if he'd been waiting for me to say exactly that. Then here's what we do. That afternoon, the plan began to take shape right there at my kitchen table. David pulled a small black case from his bag and clicked it open to reveal 3 devices, no bigger than the palm of my hand. They look like air fresheners, he said, handing one to me, but they're recorders. One for the kitchen, one for the living room, and one for the hallway near your bedroom. They'll capture audio whenever there's movement. I turned the device over in my hand, its smooth plastic surface catching the light. And if they try to be clever, he reached for my phone. I'll show you how to record without them knowing. Keep your voice calm. Let them talk. The more they say, the stronger your case. The next morning, he drove me to a small clinic on the edge of town where a geriatric specialist he trusted was waiting. The exam was thorough memory tests, motor skills, problem-solving exercises. I passed them all, my mind as clear as the glass of water they handed me afterward. The doctor signed the evaluation that same day, full cognitive capacity. No signs of impairment. Back home, we slid the signed papers into a manila folder along with a draft of my will. This ensures your house, your savings, everything you own goes exactly where you want, David explained. I ran my fingers over the crisp edges of the documents. It felt strange holding proof of my own competence, as though I needed to justify my existence on paper. But it also felt steady, solid. David stood to leave. They'll come back. When they do, you'll be ready. After he left, I walked through the villa, the faint scent of mint still clinging to my fingertips from the garden. I touched the door frame, the kitchen counter, the worn arm of my reading chair. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was just holding on. I felt like I was bracing. It was a sunny Sunday when they came back, just as David predicted. I saw the SUV through the lace curtains before I heard the doors slam. This time the show had been rehearsed. Lucas wore a navy sweater, the kind he used to put on for holiday photos. Aubrey's hair was pulled back neatly, her blouse soft pastel heels swapped for flats. From the back seat, the children emerged, my grandchildren, each holding a small wrapped box. My chest tightened, not from fear, but from the knowledge they had no idea what role they were playing. Mom, Lucas said warmly as he kissed my cheek, the scent of cologne, faint but deliberate. We brought lunch, thought it'd be nice to eat together. I led them into the kitchen, the recording app already running in my apron pocket. The kids handed me their gifts, a clay dish with uneven edges, a drawing of a garden with my name scrawled across the top. I thanked them softly, my fingers lingering over their work, longer than necessary. Aubrey set out a container of pasta salad on the counter, her voice dipped in sugar. Clara, we've been thinking more about what we talked about last time. We just want what's best for you. Lucas chimed in his tone, practiced concern. After what happened last week, we're even more worried. I tilted my head. What happened last week? You forgot to turn off the gas, he said, as though delivering bad news. The neighbor had to tell you. That's not true, I replied evenly. Aubrey jumped in. And the fall in the bathroom, you had that bruise. I looked at my bare arms, not a mark in sight. Lucas reached into his bag and slid the same folder across the table, this time, thicker, a pen resting on top. We've got everything ready. Just a signature and we can take care of you. I picked up the pen, held it between my fingers, and then set it down. Actually, I said quietly, I have something to show you. I walked to the drawer beside the fridge and pulled out a thick envelope. My fingers didn't shake as I laid it on the table and slid it toward them. First, I said, opening the flap, my medical evaluation. Full cognitive capacity. No signs of impairment. Lucas's eyes darted over the page, his jaw tightening. Second, I continued pulling out a letter on heavy cream paper, a written account from David Whitaker, detailing your inquiry into how to declare me legally incompetent. Aubrey's smile flickered, then vanished. And third, I reached into my apron pocket, tapped the screen on my phone, and pressed play. Her voice came first, clear and crisp. She could stay here like a live-in helper. Lucas's laugh followed sharp in the quiet kitchen. Stop it, Aubrey said, her voice rising. Before I could answer, the front door opened and David stepped inside with a manila envelope of his own. His tone was calm, but carried the weight of finality. "Lucas Morgan," he said, "you are hereby served with a cease and desist order along with notice of intent to pursue legal action for attempted financial exploitation and elder abuse." Lucas froze, his face paling. Aubrey pushed back her chair so quickly it scraped across the floor. "This is insane," she snapped. "She doesn't even know what she's doing." I looked at her steadily. "I'm not your burden, I'm not your victim, and I'm not your retirement plan." David placed the papers firmly on the table. "You need to leave. Now." They hesitated, but in the end they walked out, the slam of the front door echoing down the hallway. Through the window, I watched them cross the yard, their children trailing behind, still clutching the gifts they had brought to sweeten the deal. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free. The legal process moved faster than I expected. Within weeks, David called to tell me Lucas had accepted a settlement. In exchange for avoiding a drawn-out trial, he agreed to complete 200 hours of community service at a senior care facility, along with a permanent mark on his record for attempted financial exploitation. "He'll be pushing wheelchairs and serving lunch trays for a while," David said over the phone. "It's not prison, but it's a lesson." I told him I wasn't looking for vengeance, just protection. The villa felt different after that, lighter somehow, as though the walls had been holding their breath and finally let it out. The faint weight that had been pressing on my chest since their first visit was gone. I threw myself into the garden. The tomatoes had doubled in height, their green vines curling like eager fingers toward the sun. I planted rosemary along the fence and added marigolds for color. The smell of fresh earth clung to me, seeping into my clothes and hair. Word of what happened traveled quietly at first through the church pews, across backyard fences, in line at the grocery store. Then women I barely knew began showing up at my gate. One came clutching a folder of bank statements, her hands trembling. Another brought homemade peach cobbler and told me her daughter had moved money from her account without asking. I didn't have all the answers, but I had numbers' names and the courage to tell them they weren't crazy, selfish, or alone. Some afternoons, David would stop by with updates or legal advice for the women who'd found their way to my kitchen table. We'd drink coffee, the papers spread out between us, the hum of the ceiling fan keeping time. One evening, as I stood on the porch watching the sky fade to lavender, I realized I no longer woke up bracing for the next blow. I was living, not just surviving. That fall, I sat at the kitchen table with David and signed the final version of my will. When I'm gone, the villa will go to a foundation that provides housing for older women with nowhere safe to go. Women who, like me, once thought survival was the ceiling. It felt right leaving something that couldn't be bargained away, traded, or stolen. A week later, I found an envelope in my mailbox, the handwriting uneven and unmistakably young. Inside was a letter from my grandchildren. They wrote that they were sorry for what happened, that they missed me, and hoped to see me again when they were old enough to come on their own. I read it twice before folding it carefully and tucking it into the old recipe box in my pantry. Some things you keep, not because you need them, but because you want to remember how far you've come. The garden was still full of color even as the mornings turned crisp. I spent my days planting bulbs for spring, my knees creaking but my back straight. The air smelled of damp earth and wood smoke from neighbors' chimneys. Sometimes, while trimming the rose bushes or raking leaves, I thought about Lucas. I wondered if in the quiet moments between shifts at the care facility, he looked at the faces of the people he served and recognized the weight of what he'd tried to take from me. Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't. It wasn't mine to decide anymore. What I knew was this: at 68, I wasn't waiting for life to be kind. I was making it so. The house, the garden, the women who came to my table for help, they were my proof that the seed planted in me years ago had taken root. And as the late afternoon sun slanted across the yard, turning the marigolds gold and the rosemary silver, I felt it again, that quiet bloom inside me, steady and sure. Some things grow even after the frost.